Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be recommending books to you based off of your favorite TV show, so let's just get right into it. So the first recommendation I have is if you are a fan of Pretty Little Liars, you will probably like A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I feel like this sounds like they shouldn't be similar, but if you've ever watched Pretty Little Liars, you may understand why this one sounds similar. This book follows a girl who is researching a crime that happened a couple years prior for her senior project. She is looking into this girl who died's murder, and they all believed that her boyfriend killed her, and then he committed suicide. So they're like, yep, that's definitely what happened. And this girl is like, I don't know that that's what happened. I'm going to find out what really happened for her senior project. So she's digging into all of this stuff and questioning all these people and just trying to find out what happened, and they're kind of constantly leading you down different paths, like, oh, could it have been this person or whatever. And it reminded me a lot of Pretty Little Liars in those plot lines where they make you think like this person's A and that person's A, and like they're constantly like shining lights on different people, making you think, oh, like this is who it is, and you're constantly being like, oh yeah, that would make total sense, but then it's not them. And it's just like, it was very reminiscent of that for me, and so I think this one would be one that people would enjoy if they enjoyed Pretty Little Liars. Next is if you like Gossip Girl. I think you'd probably like One of Us is Lying by Karen M. McManus. I don't know what it is about this book, but it just like gave me Gossip Girl vibes, like the fact that they were trying to figure out what happened. Basically in this book, if you haven't heard of it, it follows a set of kids in a classroom. This also kind of reminded me of the Breakfast Club movie a little bit. It has these like 5 kids, I think it is, in a classroom that were all in detention, and one of them ends up dying, and they're trying to figure out who killed him or why he died or whatever, because basically he was writing this like anonymous blog post type thing, I guess, and he had all these secrets about everyone in the room, and he was going to post them the next day. And I guess that's the part that sort of reminded me of Gossip Girl, was sort of like how Gossip Girl knew all this stuff about everyone in the school and was like posting it all the time. And I feel like that was very reminiscent in this book of that, because like I said, he was writing this blog of all of these people that were doing, you know, things and just seemed to know everything. And the blog keeps getting posted even once this guy has died, and so it's definitely got sort of, I guess, the similar vibes where like you're kind of like, okay, who is it that knows everything, because obviously it's got to be someone that is like friends with these people or around them all the time. It just like really gave me like the similar vibes to that show, and so I think if you liked one, you would definitely like the other. Next is another one. This one's sort of funny because I'm actually going to do a whole video on Rex for this show, and that is if you like the Gilmore Girls, you will probably like the Inheritance Games. And like I said, I'm going to do a whole video on Rex for this show. Like if you liked Gilmore Girls, you'll like this book, because I have a whole list of books that I think give me Gilmore Girls vibes. But this one I picked particularly because in this book, basically the storyline with this one is that Avery has all of a sudden found out that she has inherited this entire like estate from this guy she's never met before, and she doesn't know why. All of her like this guy's grandsons and daughters and stuff have basically been left with like a little bit, but like not nearly what they were expecting. This guy literally had billions of dollars, and he's left it all to her, and she's like, well, why me, basically. But he's left all these riddles and stuff for her to figure out. And so you're probably like, what on earth does that have to do with Gilmore Girls? And like, I would feel the same way, because it doesn't sound like it should be the same. But what really reminded me of Gilmore Girls in this was just like the base sort of storyline, I guess, where this girl is not rich. She's like from like, you know, this small town probably, and just like doesn't really know how the rich live. Like she's very shocked when she finds out all these things that these boys have and stuff, and like the money is just like this like crazy number to her that she can't even imagine. And I found it was very sort of reminiscent of Rory being introduced to like the world of her grandparents, and like when she gets to that point where she's in Yale and starts like meeting all these like rich kids, like it's very sort of new for her compared to her like Stars Hollow life. And on top of that, there's a friend in this book that reminded me so much of Lane from Gilmore Girls. This girl has a friend named Max in this book, and she was very similar. Her parents were super strict. She was always at church. She wasn't allowed to swear. She wasn't allowed to like do all of these things, and it just reminded me so much of Lane with like her sneaking out and like doing all these things, and like their friendship where like she's best friends with the girl who suddenly found out she has all this money. And I found that that reminded me a lot of Lane and Rory and Gilmore Girls. Like I said, I just thought their friendship was very similar in that like one was sort of had free reign of doing whatever she wanted, and the other one was kind of like living in this super strict house with all these rules and like very church focused. And I just thought that was sort of interesting. It reminded me a lot of them. And so like I said, there will be a video not long off after this one that will be all Gilmore Girls recs, so definitely subscribe if you want to see that one. Next is the show Friends. If you like this one, I actually have 2 book recs for this one. The first one is The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams. This is like the strongest best friends to lovers book I've ever read. It's leans so hard into that trope. It reminded me so much of Ross and Rachel, where you just like know they're meant to be together, and there's all these like other girlfriends and boyfriends that are just like in the way, and you're like, okay, why can't you guys just see that you should be together? Like, why aren't you like putting 2 and 2 together here? And it just reminded me so much of Ross and Rachel on Friends, because like I feel like on Friends everybody knows that they should be getting together, but they're always dating other people or just like trying to ignore it or whatever. And I think that this one reminded me so much of that, because I think even like on Friends, Ross and Rachel are like best friends. And so this one was very reminiscent of that one. This book follows a football player, and I believe she's a dance instructor, and I just really loved this one. Like I said, it's so hardcore best friends to lovers. It's so sweet. And one of my favorite things about this one is there's a part early on in the book where like his girlfriend says like, oh, choose between her and me, like the best friend and the girlfriend, and he chooses the best friend. He's like, yeah, I'll choose her every time basically. And I was like, oh my god, I loved this book. It was so good. And my second recommendation for if you liked Friends is the Addicted / Calloway Sisters series, mostly because I just think the friend group in this was so reminiscent of the friend group in Friends. Like they all hang out together, they live together, they are just, it's very similar. They're in their 20s going through their lives, and it's written in a way where it's almost like a Friends show. Like there's no real plot line to these books, you're just watching them live their lives, which is sort of similar to how Friends is. Like there's no like really underlying plot, I guess, in Friends. You're just watching different parts of their lives, and that's what these books are like. And so I do think that these definitely reminded me of that show, and they're all like super close friends. Some are related, some aren't, and that was just like very similar to Friends, obviously, like Ross and Monica being related, there was that sort of connection. And like I said, it just reminded me a lot of their friend group. Next is if you like Outer Banks, you will probably like Something Wilder by Christina Lauren. This is a book about a girl who runs this sort of like touristy treasure hunting like mountain guided tour type thing, and she thinks it's all super cheesy, like she's not into it, and she's just basically doing it to make money. And so she is running this tour, and she was dating this guy years before who left for some sort of like family emergency and just never came back. And so she sort of obviously like was mad at him for a while. He never called or anything, and he ends up showing up on this tour like 10 years later, and he didn't know he was coming. He didn't know she was running the tour because his friend group always picks one guy like every year to plan the entire trip, and they don't know where they're going until they get there. So he had no idea they were going to this place where she lives and that she was running this tour like at all, and he just ends up there. But I think what really reminded me of Outer Banks was just like the treasure hunting sort of part of this, because that's like very prominent in the first season of Outer Banks. I haven't watched the second season yet, so I actually can't comment on that, but it reminded me a lot of season 1 of Outer Banks, where they're sort of, you know, looking for this like treasure thing, but like also there's like a romance element. Obviously it's a romance book, and I just really thought that this was very similar. It's got sort of the adventure like action vibes, which I thought was really interesting. Next is if you like The Big Bang Theory, you'll probably like My Favorite Half Night Stand by Christina Lauren. This one follows a group of, I believe they're all professors at a university, and there's this one girl in the friend group and the rest are guys, and they sort of decide that they are going to all get dates for this event that they have every year. And so they end up on these dating apps, and they're sort of like comparing stories and stuff. But she ends up talking to one of the other guys in the friend group on this dating app, and they don't really realize it at first, and obviously it like goes from there. This one obviously reminded me of Big Bang Theory because they're all professors, and so they're all hanging out at like the university, and they're just all very like nerdy sort of people. And so this one definitely gave me like Big Bang Theory vibes. Next is if you like the show Castle, you'll probably like the book Indigo Ridge by Devney Perry. This one I thought was so similar. I kept comparing these two while I was reading this book because if you haven't seen the show Castle, I highly recommend it. It's really good. It's about a female cop who has this guy that she's like best friends with, and I do believe they date on the show. To be honest, I can't remember. I haven't watched the seasons like in order, so I just watched like an episode here or there. But this guy like trails her on all of her cop like missions, I guess, and he's an author, so he's trying to get ideas for his next like crime book. And so he's following her around to all these crime scenes and stuff, and he like has no like cop qualifications whatsoever. He's literally just there because he's writing a book. But they spend a lot of time together because he's always following her around. And Indigo Ridge reminded me a lot of that because it follows a female sheriff who has just moved to this town and is investigating all of these suicides that keep happening on this cliff, or on Indigo Ridge. And there is a guy who lives on that property, and so he is sort of like following her around all the time because he wants to, you know, be up to date on the status of the case, and he's like always looking into it, and he wants to know like what she knows and what's happening and all this stuff. And it reminded me a lot of that because he wasn't a cop, but he was just like following her everywhere and wanted to know what was happening. And it just really reminded me a lot of Castle. And like I said, really good show, really good book. I love both of these, and it just like really reminded me of that while I was reading it. And lastly is if you like the show Once Upon a Time, you will probably like the book Hooked by Emily McIntyre. You'd actually probably like the entire series because it's all about like Disney based fairy tales, and so obviously like this is probably gonna be right up your alley. Hooked is a sort of like modern day fairy tale retelling. It's not really like, it's obviously based on Peter Pan, but it's not like magical really. It's just like they have the names of the characters, so there's like a Hook and a Peter and a Wendy, but it's not as like, it's not the exact story. Basically in this one, Hook is trying to get back at Peter by dating his daughter Wendy, and so that's sort of how this story goes about. I think it's sort of like Once Upon a Time, where Once Upon a Time is like in like the modern day setting, but it's still very fairy tale-esque. And I think this sort of had those vibes where it was modern day but fairy tale-esque, but it doesn't have like the magic sort of element to it. But I do think if you liked one, you'd probably like the other. And so those are all of my recommendations for today. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below. I do new book videos every single week, and I will see you next time.